She will never return from London. I've arranged everything. The deal dies with her." The voice was smooth as polished glass and just as cold. It sliced through the hushed quiet of the 50th floor, a place that was supposed to be sleeping. Daniel Holt froze, his hand tightening on the handle of his mop. The water in his bucket sloshed silently. He was hidden by the deep shadows of the executive wing, a ghost in a gray uniform whose only job was to erase the day's footprints. He wasn't supposed to hear things. He was supposed to be invisible. He pressed himself tighter against the cool marble wall, his heart starting a low, heavy drum against his ribs. Through the crack in the doorway of the Chief of Staff's office, he could see a silhouette against the glittering city lights. Malcolm Carver, a man whose smile was always perfect, whose suits cost more than Daniel made in a month. He was pacing, a phone pressed to his ear. "No, there will be no loose ends," Malcolm continued, his voice a low murmur of absolute confidence. "The welcome party in London is prepared. It will be tragic, a terrible accident. Vera's ambition finally getting the best of her. The board will be devastated, and our friends at Omnicorp will be grateful." A chill, sharp and biting, snaked down Daniel's spine. Vera. He knew the name. Everyone in this building knew the name. Vera Dorn, the CEO, the woman who built this empire from the ground up. She was tough, demanding, a legend whispered about in the break rooms and lobbies. And her right-hand man, the one she trusted implicitly, was calmly planning her murder. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. This was insane. It was a movie plot, not something you overhear while cleaning a billionaire's office at 3 in the morning. He should just back away, pretend he heard nothing, keep his head down, collect his paycheck, and go home to what mattered. Home. The word itself was a punch to the gut. It brought an immediate image to his mind. A small room, the soft glow of a nightlight, and the quiet, rhythmic beep of a machine that was supposed to be a comfort, but sounded only like a countdown. Lila, his daughter, his 7-year-old anchor in a world that had long ago spun out of his control. He pulled his phone from his pocket, the screen illuminating his worn, tired face. The background was a picture of her, taken last summer before the sickness had stolen the color from her cheeks. Her smile was missing a tooth, and her eyes were bright with a light that Daniel felt was his personal responsibility to keep from going out. He thought of her small hand in his, the feel of her frail fingers clinging to him as the doctors spoke in hushed, complicated words. Rare genetic condition, degenerative, experimental treatments. The words were followed by numbers, figures so impossibly large they seemed like a joke. He worked 2 jobs, cleaning this palace of glass and steel at night and a warehouse during the day, and he was still sinking, pulled under by a tide of medical debt he could never escape. He looked back at the sliver of light from Malcolm's office. This was not his fight. Getting involved was stupid, dangerous. A man like Malcolm Carver could crush a man like him without a second thought, swat him away like a fly. He had a daughter to think about. He couldn't risk losing this job. He couldn't risk anything. But then, he remembered what Lila had whispered to him just last night, her breath warm against his cheek as he tucked her in. She'd been looking at a picture book about knights and dragons. "You're like a knight, Daddy," she'd said, her voice sleepy but sure. "You're always brave." He wasn't brave. He was terrified. He was terrified of the beeping machine, of the sympathetic glances from the nurses, of a future he couldn't bear to imagine. But his daughter thought he was a knight. And what does a knight do when he sees a dragon? Malcolm's voice came one last time, final and sharp. "It's done. She leaves tomorrow. By the end of the week, I'll be running the company." The line clicked dead. A moment later, the office light went out. Daniel didn't breathe. He stood perfectly still, a statue made of fear and indecision, as the sound of expensive leather shoes faded down the hallway. When the elevator chimed in the distance, he finally allowed himself to exhale, the breath rattling in his chest. He was just a janitor, a ghost, but a ghost had just heard a man sentence a woman to death. He looked down at his hands, calloused and chapped from bleach and hard work. They were the hands of a man who fixed things, who cleaned up messes. This was the biggest, ugliest mess he had ever seen, and he had no idea what to do. The sky was beginning to bleed with the gray light of dawn by the time Daniel got home. His small apartment was quiet, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and the low hum of Lila's machines. He tiptoed into her room and stood over her bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. Her favorite stuffed bear, worn and patched, was tucked under her arm. Even in sleep, her face looked pale, a fragile porcelain doll. He reached down and brushed a stray piece of hair from her forehead. Her skin was cool to the touch. He hated this. He hated the feeling of helplessness that was his constant companion, a shadow he couldn't shake. He was her father. He was supposed to protect her, to make the world safe for her, and he couldn't even fight the microscopic enemies invading her own body. Her eyelids fluttered open, and a soft, sleepy smile touched her lips when she saw him. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice raspy. "You're home." "I'm home, sweet pea," he said, forcing a smile of his own. He sat on the edge of her bed, taking her small hand in his. "How are you feeling?" "Tired. The beep-beep machine was loud last night." She looked at him, her gaze clear and far too perceptive for a 7-year-old. "You look tired, too. Did you fight lots of dirt monsters at work?" He squeezed her hand. "The biggest." "Did you win?" Daniel thought of Malcolm Carver's cold, confident voice. He thought of Vera Dorn, a woman he'd only ever seen in pictures, who was scheduled to fly to her own execution. "The fight's not over yet," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Lila's brow furrowed with concern. She lifted her small hand and placed it on his cheek, her touch surprisingly steady. "It's okay, Daddy. You're a knight. You always win." He leaned into her touch, closing his eyes for a second, drawing strength from her impossible, unwavering faith in him. She saw him as a hero. In her world, good guys didn't stand by and let bad things happen. They didn't hide in the shadows. They fought. He knew what he had to do. It was reckless. It was terrifying. He was a janitor about to walk into the path of a speeding train. But as he looked at his daughter's trusting face, he realized it wasn't a choice. It was a duty. He had to try to stop it. He had to be the man Lila already thought he was. He just prayed he would survive. Daniel spent the next few hours in a haze of sleepless dread. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. He made Lila breakfast, his hands moving with the practiced calm of a parent, while his mind screamed. He crushed her pills into her applesauce, his smile feeling like a cheap mask he'd pasted onto his face. Every normal, mundane action felt like a lie. How could he sit here talking about cartoon characters when a woman was walking toward a pre-dug grave? He arranged for his neighbor, a kind, elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, to watch Lila for the day, using the excuse of a mandatory work meeting. The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. "You look like you've seen a ghost, dear," Mrs. Gable said, her wrinkled face etched with concern as she stood in his doorway. "Just a long night," Daniel mumbled, kissing the top of Lila's head. He held her a second longer than usual, breathing in the faint, sweet scent of her shampoo. "Be brave, Daddy," Lila whispered, hugging him tight. "Always," he promised, his voice thick. The airport was a different world. It was a river of noise, money, and frantic energy, and Daniel felt like a stone dropped into the current. He didn't belong here. His worn work jacket and faded jeans stood out against the sharp suits and designer luggage. People flowed around him, their eyes sliding past him as if he were just another piece of airport architecture. It was a chilling reminder of his own invisibility, the very thing that had allowed him to overhear the plot in the first place. He scanned the massive departure boards, his eyes racing over the list of cities. London. There were 3 flights leaving for London before noon: British Airways, American, and Virgin Atlantic. Which one? He had no idea. Panic began to set in, cold and sharp. What was he thinking? This was a fool's errand. He was going to miss her. He was going to fail. He started toward the British Airways check-in, then stopped, his gut twisting. He was wasting time. He needed to think. Where would a CEO like Vera Dorn be? First class. He turned, his gaze sweeping over the exclusive check-in lounges. And that's when he saw her. Vera Dorn was not like her pictures. In person, she was smaller, but she commanded the space around her as if she owned the air itself. Her suit was a severe, elegant black, her hair pulled back in a way that was both stylish and severe. She moved with a clipped, impatient energy, an assistant scurrying at her heels. And standing right beside her, smiling and holding a leather portfolio, was Malcolm Carver. The sight of him sent a jolt of adrenaline through Daniel. The casual way Malcolm leaned in to say something to her, the proprietary smile on his face. It was the calm, confident look of a predator about to close a trap. This was it. His one chance. Daniel took a breath, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He started forward, weaving through the throng of travelers. He pushed past a family with a mountain of luggage, ignoring their indignant shouts. He was moving faster now, his focus narrowed to the two figures about to disappear into the priority security line. He broke into a clumsy run, his work boots thudding on the polished floor. "Miss Dorn!" he shouted. Heads turned. Vera Dorn stopped, her expression of irritation deepening as she saw him barreling toward her. Her bodyguard, a large man in a dark suit, immediately stepped forward, placing a hand on his chest. "Sir, that's close enough." Daniel ignored him, his eyes locked on Vera. "Ma'am, please," he panted, his voice raw with urgency. He could feel Malcolm's eyes on him, cold and assessing. "You have to listen to me. Your life is in danger. Don't get on that plane." The words tumbled out, exactly as he'd rehearsed in his head, but they sounded wild, unhinged. Vera Dorn looked at him, not with fear, but with a look of pure, unadulterated ice. It was a look that measured him, categorized him, and dismissed him in a single, brutal second. He was nothing, a piece of grit in her perfectly functioning machine. "Get this man away from me," she commanded, her voice quiet, but carrying the unassailable weight of absolute power. It happened fast. The bodyguard's hand on his chest became a vicious shove. Daniel stumbled backward, his feet tangling, and he crashed hard onto the polished floor. The impact sent a shockwave of pain and humiliation through him. His shoulders screamed in protest. People were staring, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Vera Dorn didn't even look back. She adjusted the collar of her blazer, a flicker of annoyance the only sign she'd been disturbed, and then she swept through the security gate. Malcolm Carver, however, paused for a fraction of a second. He glanced down at Daniel, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. It was a look of triumph. Then he, too, was gone. The bodyguard leaned over him, his voice a low threat. "Stay down, or I'll have you arrested for harassment. Understood?" Daniel just nodded, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a cold, heavy despair. He had failed. He had tried to be the knight, and he'd been struck down like a peasant. He pushed himself up slowly, his body aching, his pride shattered. He was just a janitor. Nobody listens to a janitor. He limped over to the departure board, watching as the status for the British Airways flight to London flickered from check-in to boarding. He watched the name on the screen. Dorn. He had failed. He had looked the dragon in the eye, and it had laughed at him. A wave of nausea washed over him. He thought of Vera Dorn, walking confidently onto that plane, flying across an ocean toward an accident that had been so carefully arranged. He thought of Malcolm Carver, sipping champagne in first class, a murderer hiding in plain sight. And then he thought of Lila. "You always win, Daddy." He couldn't. He couldn't just let her die. His eyes darted around the concourse, frantic now. He saw the signs for restrooms, for restaurants, for duty-free shops. And then he saw it. Tucked away in a small alcove near the currency exchange, a relic from another time, a row of public payphones. A desperate, terrible idea began to form in his mind, an idea so reckless it made his breath catch. It was a line, a bright, burning line that once crossed, he could never come back from. He would lose his job. He could go to prison. He would lose everything. But Vera Dorn would live. His feet were moving before his brain had fully caught up. He walked toward the payphone, his steps heavy, each one a choice. He saw his reflection in the dark screen of the phone, a tired, desperate man with fear in his eyes. The night was gone. This was something else. This was a man with nothing left to lose. He lifted the heavy receiver, the cool plastic slick in his trembling hand. He fed the coins into the slot, the metallic clang echoing the finality of his decision. He punched in the number for airport operations, a number he'd seen 1,000 times on security posters. The line on the other end began to ring. One ring, two. A calm, professional voice answered. Port Authority Operations. Daniel took a shaky breath, his own voice coming out as a choked whisper he barely recognized. "There's a bomb on the plane to London," he said. "Stop it immediately." He dropped the receiver back into its cradle as if it were on fire. The clatter of the plastic echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of his own mind. For a single, paralyzing moment, Daniel stood frozen, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the metal shelf. The words he'd spoken hung in the air, a poison he had just released into the world. There's a bomb on the plane. The lie was monstrous. He had just terrified hundreds of innocent people. He had committed a serious crime, one that federal agents didn't take lightly. His heart hammered a frantic, sick rhythm against his ribs. He had to leave. He had to get out of the airport before the storm he'd just summoned broke. He turned, pulling the hood of his thin jacket over his head, and began walking, forcing his legs to move at a normal pace. "Don't run. Don't look guilty." The advice screamed in his head. Every security camera felt like an eye boring into his back. Every uniformed officer seemed to be looking straight at him. The first sign of the chaos was subtle. A flurry of activity near the security checkpoint. A gate agent speaking urgently into her radio, her face pale. Then the voice came over the PA system, calm at first, but with an undercurrent of steel. "Attention in the terminal. All flight operations are temporarily suspended. Please remain in the concourse and away from the gate areas." A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. Phones were raised. People stood on their toes, trying to see what was happening. Then the message changed, the calm cracking. "Security and emergency personnel to Gate B45. A security incident has been reported. Repeat, all emergency personnel to Gate B45. That was her gate. The murmur turned into a wave of anxious chatter. The river of people Daniel had fought through earlier was now a churning mess of confusion. Uniformed state troopers began to appear, their movements swift and purposeful, cutting paths through the growing panic. Daniel kept his head down, his gaze fixed on the exit signs. He was a fish swimming against a tidal wave of fear. He bumped into a man who cursed at him. He shuffled past a crying child. The air grew thick with tension. He could feel it, the net tightening. He had to get to the train, get back to the city, back to Lila. A sharp command cut through the noise. "Everyone stay where you are. Put your bags down." Daniel's blood turned to ice. He risked a glance over his shoulder. A team of heavily armed agents in tactical gear was fanning out across the concourse. They were shutting the place down. He was out of time. He ducked his head lower and pushed forward, a man with a singular, desperate purpose: escape. He slipped through a gap in the crowd, moving along the wall, past a closed newsstand and a coffee shop where employees were staring out with wide, frightened eyes. The exit doors were just ahead, tantalizingly close. He pushed one open and stumbled out into the cool, gray air of the parking garage, the sirens starting to wail in the distance. He didn't stop. He broke into a full run, the sound of his own ragged breathing filling his ears. He'd done it. He had stopped the plane. And he had just become the most wanted man in the city. Aboard the British Airways flight, Vera Dorn tapped an impatient rhythm on the armrest of her leather seat. She'd just finished a scathing phone call with her legal team in London about the delay. Unacceptable, she had snapped into her phone. Find out who is responsible for this incompetence and have them fired. Malcolm Carver sat beside her, the picture of calm concern. Probably a mechanical issue, Vera. They're always overly cautious. Caution costs millions, she retorted, snapping her phone shut. Just then, the pilot's voice came over the intercom, clipped and devoid of its earlier warmth. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I'm afraid we have to return to the gate. There has been a security threat made against this aircraft. Please remain seated. We will be met by the authorities on the ground. A collective gasp went through the first-class cabin. Vera's annoyance instantly hardened into cold fury. A security threat. This was no longer an inconvenience. It was a direct attack on her schedule, her world. What in God's name is going on? She demanded to no one in particular. Malcolm leaned closer, his voice a concerned whisper. This is unbelievable. Vera, do you think this has anything to do with that man in the terminal? The one who was shouting at you? Vera's jaw tightened. The janitor. The thought was absurd. He was a nobody, a piece of dust. But the timing, it was too much of a coincidence. The image of his wild, desperate eyes flashed in her mind. When the plane docked, two stone-faced men in dark suits boarded before the doors were even opened to the jet bridge. Ms. Dorn, one of them said, holding up a badge. FBI, we need you to come with us. They led her to a sterile, windowless room deep in the airport's underbelly. The fury she felt was a contained inferno. Do you have any idea how much this little drama is costing my company? She began, her voice like ice. The lead agent, a man named Harris, didn't flinch. Our primary concern is a credible bomb threat, ma'am. Now, we need to ask you, has anyone threatened you recently? Is there anyone who might want to harm you? Vera almost laughed. My list of competitors is a mile long. They want to harm my bottom line, not my person. What about today? Harris pressed, his gaze unwavering. Anything unusual at the airport? Vera hesitated, the memory of the janitor's frantic face returning. To admit she'd been accosted felt like admitting a weakness, a crack in her armor. But lying to the FBI was a fool's game. There was an incident, she said, her tone clipped. Some lunatic, unbalanced. He got in my face, ranted something about the plane. Harris's partner began taking notes. Can you describe him, ma'am? Nondescript, she said, with a dismissive wave of her hand. 40-something, looked exhausted. He was wearing a janitor's uniform under a cheap jacket. He was babbling about me being in danger. Harris's eyes sharpened. A janitor? Yes, he works in my building, apparently. I've never seen him before in my life. The two agents exchanged a look. It was a small, almost imperceptible glance. But Vera, a master at reading boardroom dynamics, understood it perfectly. In that single moment, the focus of their entire investigation had shifted. It was no longer a faceless, anonymous threat. It now had the face of her janitor. Daniel burst through the door of his apartment, his chest heaving. Mrs. Gable looked up from the television, startled. Lila, who had been coloring at the small kitchen table, jumped up. Daddy! He swept her into his arms, holding her tight, burying his face in her hair. She was safe. For now, she was safe. Goodness, Daniel, you look like you ran all the way from Manhattan, Mrs. Gable said, rising slowly from her armchair. Something like that, Daniel breathed, his voice unsteady. The local news was on the television. The screen was filled with live footage from the airport, flashing lights, police cars, and a crowd of stranded passengers. Can you believe it? Mrs. Gable said, shaking her head. Some maniac called in a bomb threat. They're saying it was a flight to London. The whole airport is on lockdown. Daniel's blood ran cold. He couldn't look away from the screen. They were showing blurry security footage, a shot of the chaotic concourse, and for a terrifying, heart-stopping second, the camera zoomed in on a figure in a hooded jacket, hurrying away from a bank of payphones. It was him. His face wasn't clear, but the jacket, the posture, the desperation, it was unmistakably him. He felt Lila's small arms tighten around his neck. "Are you okay, Daddy? Your heart is going boom, boom, boom." He forced himself to breathe, to smile down at her. "I'm okay, sweet pea. I'm okay." But as he held his daughter, the reporter's voice droned on in the background about the ongoing federal investigation and the search for the person responsible. He knew he wasn't okay. He had stopped one tragedy, only to invite a new one right to his own front door. He was a fugitive, and they were looking for him. The news report played on a loop, each repetition another turn of the screw in Daniel's gut. Blurry footage, the words "Federal Manhunt," a phone number flashing on the screen for an anonymous tip line. His city, the sprawling, indifferent place he'd called home his whole life, was now a cage, and he was the rat. He had to run. The thought was immediate, instinctual. They had his description. They knew he was a janitor at Dorn Industries. It was only a matter of hours, maybe minutes, before they pulled his employee file, saw his face, and his address. They would come here. They would kick down his door and drag him away in front of his daughter. The image was so horrifying, it made him physically sick. He looked over at Lila, who was now back at the table, humming softly as she colored in her book, oblivious to the world burning down around her. Her portable oxygen machine hissed softly in the corner, a constant reminder of her fragility. And that was the problem. He could run, but she couldn't. Her life was tethered to this apartment, to the machines, to the delicate schedule of medications and treatments that kept her stable. Taking her with him would be a death sentence. Leaving her felt like one too. He sank onto the worn sofa, his head in his hands. What had he done? In trying to be a knight, he'd managed to set his own castle on fire. A sharp knock on the door made him jump, his heart lurching into his throat. "They're here!" He scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. There was no fire escape, no back door. He was trapped. "Daniel?" Mrs. Gable's voice called softly from the hallway. "I saw the news. Are you all right in there?" Relief washed over him so intensely his knees felt weak. He cracked the door open, keeping the chain on. "We're fine, Mrs. Gable, just shaken up." The old woman's eyes were full of worry. "They'll catch the monster who did it. Don't you worry." He just nodded, unable to speak. The monster. That's what he was now. He closed the door, his mind made up. He had one chance, one sliver of hope, and it depended on the kindness of this old woman. In a sleek, soundproofed office overlooking the city, Malcolm Carver slammed his fist down on his mahogany desk. The London trip was canceled. The deal was in jeopardy. And Vera was still alive. His carefully constructed plan, months in the making, had been obliterated by a ghost, a janitor. The sheer, infuriating randomness of it was enough to make him want to scream. His phone buzzed. It was his contact at the rival corporation, Omnicorp. "What happened?" The voice on the other end snarled. "A complication," Malcolm said, his voice a low, controlled growl. "Some lunatic called in a bomb threat. The airport is a fortress." "You assured me this was clean." "It was," Malcolm snapped. "This is a variable I couldn't have predicted, but it's being handled." He hung up and immediately dialed his own head of corporate security, a man whose loyalty was bought and paid for. "I need a name," Malcolm said, dispensing with pleasantries. "This morning at the airport, a janitor from our building caused a scene with Miss Dorn. He was apprehended, then let go. The FBI is looking for him. I want his file, name, address, photo, everything. I want it 5 minutes ago." "What's this about, Mr. Carver?" "It's about a loose end," Malcolm said, his voice turning to ice. "And you're going to help me tie it." He had to get to Daniel Holt before the FBI did. The janitor had seen his face. He'd heard his name. If Holt talked, everything was over. Malcolm wouldn't just go to prison. He'd lose the fortune Omnicorp had promised him. He stared out the window at the city below. Somewhere down there, a janitor was running. He wouldn't be for long. That evening, Daniel knelt in front of Lila, his heart feeling like a lead weight in his chest. This was the hardest thing he'd ever had to do. "Hey, sweet pea," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I have to go away for a little bit." Lila's face fell, her crayon stopping mid-stroke. "Go away?" "Where?" He had to lie. The truth was an impossible burden for her to carry. It's for a special job, out of town. It's very important, and they need me to go right away." Her lower lip began to tremble. "But you can't. Who's going to read me my stories? Who's going to be my knight?" Hey, he said, pulling her into a hug. He could feel her small body starting to shake with quiet sobs. "Mrs. Gable is going to stay with you. She'll read you all the stories you want. And I'll be back before you know it." "I promise, Pinky, promise," she whispered into his shoulder, her voice muffled. He held out his little finger, locking it with hers. "Pinky, promise." It felt like another betrayal, another sin he was piling onto his soul. He spent the next hour with Mrs. Gable, his voice low and urgent. He didn't tell her everything, but he told her enough. "I saw something I shouldn't have at work, Mrs. Gable. Some very bad people. They think I might talk to the police, and now I think they're looking for me. I have to disappear for a while, to keep Lila safe." He showed her the schedule of medications, the emergency contact numbers for the doctors, the way the oxygen machine worked. He handed her a thick envelope of cash, nearly everything he had saved. "For food, for anything she needs, please." The old woman looked from the cash to Daniel's desperate eyes, and then toward Lila's room. She didn't ask questions he couldn't answer. She simply placed her wrinkled hand over his. "You're a good father, Daniel Holt. I'll watch her as if she were my own. You just keep yourself safe." Later, after Lila had fallen into a restless sleep, Daniel stood in her doorway, memorizing the sight of her. He was a ghost again, about to slip out into the night. He was leaving behind the only thing in the entire world that mattered. He took one last look, then turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind him. A quiet click that sounded like the end of the world. Miles away, in her silent, sprawling penthouse, Vera Dorn stared at the city lights. An FBI agent had called an hour ago. "We have an ID, Ms. Dorn. The suspect's name is Daniel Holt. He's a janitor with our cleaning subcontractor. No criminal record. Single father. We're closing in on his location now." It should have been a relief. The culprit was identified, a disgruntled employee, just as she'd thought. Case closed. But one question kept nagging at her, a tiny, insistent splinter in her mind. Why did he warn me? People who plant bombs don't run through airports screaming for their targets to get off the plane. It didn't make sense. The act was one of chaos, but the warning had been an act of preservation. His own words echoed in her memory, not as the ravings of a lunatic, but as a plea. "Your life is in danger." She stood up and walked to her desk, pulling up the corporate directory. She found the subcontractors list. She found his name, Daniel Holt. And next to it, a grainy, low-resolution ID photo. It was him, the tired, nondescript man from the airport. And for the first time, Vera Dorn began to wonder if everyone, the FBI, her staff, and she herself, had gotten the story completely wrong. The city at night was a different beast. By day, Daniel had been invisible by choice, a man who blended into the background. Now, invisibility was a desperate life-or-death necessity. He stayed in the shadows, his hood pulled low, moving through the forgotten arteries of the city, filthy back alleys, the echoing service corridors beneath office buildings, the grim, empty spaces that people with comfortable lives never saw. Every distant siren made his heart leap into his throat. Every passing police car was a spotlight he had to shrink from. The city was plastered with his face. Not the clear professional photo from Vera's computer, but the grainy, distorted image from the airport security camera. The news called him the airport bomber, a phantom who had terrorized 1,000 people. They had turned him into a monster. He found a temporary refuge in the husk of an abandoned textile warehouse, a place he used to clean years ago. The air was thick with the ghosts of dust and decay. He huddled in a corner, pulling his thin jacket tighter against the damp chill that seeped up from the concrete floor. He was cold, hungry, and utterly alone. All he had was the crumpled drawing Lila had made for him, a knight fighting a dragon, which he kept in his breast pocket like a holy relic. He was a knight with no armor, no sword, and a kingdom that had shrunk to this one dusty corner. Malcolm Carver stood in front of a bank of monitors in a private security office, a place that didn't officially exist on any Dorn Industries floor plan. The face of Daniel Holt, clear and detailed from his employee file, stared back at him from a dozen screens. The FBI is treating this as a lone wolf threat, his security chief, a former military man named Pierce, reported. They're focusing on his apartment, his known associates, his daughter's hospital records. "They're fools," Malcolm snarled, pacing the room like a caged panther. "They're looking for a terrorist. I'm looking for a witness who needs to have a permanent accident. Where is he?" "He's gone to ground," Pierce said calmly. "No activity on his bank cards. His phone is off. He's running scared." "Scared isn't good enough. I want him found," Malcolm ordered. He pulled out a checkbook and wrote a number with 6 figures on it. "This is a bonus for you and your team. I don't want him arrested. I don't want him questioned. I want him gone. Use every resource, every contact you have. Find him before the feds do." Pierce took the check, his expression unreadable. "Consider it done." The hunt was on. While the FBI searched for a phantom bomber, a private, far more lethal search was spreading through the city's underworld. The message was simple. Find the janitor. There's a payday involved, dead or alive. The first sign that he was being hunted by more than just the police came on his second night of running. Huddled in an alley behind a bakery for warmth, Daniel watched as a black sedan without markings cruised slowly down the street. It stopped, and 2 men in sharp, dark suits got out. They weren't cops. They moved with a predatory stillness that Daniel recognized from 1,000 movies, but which was terrifyingly real in person. One of them held up a phone, illuminating a picture. Daniel's picture. They showed it to a homeless man sleeping in a nearby doorway. The homeless man shook his head. The men moved on, their eyes sweeping the shadows. They were methodical, professional. Daniel held his breath, pressing himself so far back into the alcove he could feel the crumbling brick against his spine. The men were 20 feet away. One of them paused, his head tilting as if he'd heard something. His gaze swept over the alley, and for a heart-stopping second, his eyes seemed to lock right onto Daniel's hiding spot. Daniel's entire body went rigid. He sees me. But then a city bus roared past on the street, its brakes hissing, and the man's attention was broken. He grunted something to his partner, and they got back in the car and drove off. Daniel didn't move for a full 10 minutes. When he finally let out the breath he'd been holding, it came out as a ragged, shaky gasp. This changed everything. This wasn't just about avoiding the police and clearing his name anymore. This was about survival. Vera Dorn did not like puzzles she couldn't solve. The case of Daniel Holt was a puzzle. The FBI's theory was simple. Disgruntled employee, mental instability, snapped under pressure. It was neat and tidy, and Vera's instincts screamed that it was wrong. In her penthouse office, she pulled up Daniel Holt's file again. 2 years with the cleaning subcontractor, perfect attendance, no complaints. His emergency contact was a Mrs. Gable, his neighbor. His next of kin was listed as Lila Holt, daughter, age 7, a daughter. The information humanized him in a way that made Vera uncomfortable. Crazed bombers weren't usually single fathers to 7-year-old girls. On a hunch, she accessed the building's security logs for the night before the incident. She cross-referenced Daniel's cleaning schedule for the 50th floor with the keycard access logs. As expected, Daniel's master keycard was used to access the floor at 1:05 a.m. He was there for his shift. Then she looked for everyone else. The floor was empty, except for one person. Malcolm Carver. His keycard had been used to enter his office at 1:15 a.m. and to leave the floor at 3:30 a.m. It was unusual. Malcolm was rarely in that late unless she was there with him. What was he doing alone in his office for over 2 hours in the middle of the night? It wasn't proof. It was barely even a suspicion. But it was a thread. A single, tiny thread in a story that wasn't holding together. And Vera Dorn was a woman who knew exactly how to pull on a thread until the entire tapestry unraveled. After 3 days of running, Daniel felt himself starting to fray at the edges. He was living on stolen scraps of food and a gnawing, constant fear. He had to know if Lila was okay. He spent his last $40 on a cheap, untraceable burner phone from a corner store. He dialed Mrs. Gable's number from the relative safety of a crowded subway platform, the noise of the trains a shield against anyone listening. "Hello?" Her familiar, frail voice answered. "Mrs. Gable, it's Daniel." "Oh, Daniel," she gasped, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Are you all right? The police have been here. They asked so many questions." "I'm okay," he lied. "How is she? How is Lila?" "She misses you something fierce. She asks for you every 5 minutes. But she's holding steady. Her nurse came by this morning." There was a pause. "Daniel, some other men came by too. Yesterday. They weren't police. They were in a fancy car. They said they were from your office, from Human Resources. They offered me money for any information about where you might go." The blood drained from Daniel's face. It wasn't just a close call in an alley. They knew where he lived. They had tried to bribe his neighbor. They were hunting him systematically. "Don't tell them anything, Mrs. Gable. Don't trust them. They are not good people." "I didn't, dear," she said, her voice firm. "I told them I hadn't seen you in weeks and shut the door in their faces." A wave of gratitude washed over him. "Thank you. Just come home soon, Daniel," she pleaded softly. "Your little girl needs her night." He hung up, the words echoing in his ears. He was no knight. He was a rat in a maze, and the walls were closing in. Hiding was a losing game. The FBI would eventually find him, and Malcolm's men would find him first. He had only one path left. He couldn't run. He couldn't hide. He had to fight. He looked at the burner phone in his hand. He had no proof. He had nothing but his word against a powerful, ruthless man. He had to get a message to the only person who might listen, the only person with the power to challenge Malcolm, the woman who hated him. He had to find a way to reach Vera Dorn. Vera Dorn's world was a fortress. Her life was a carefully curated collection of secure locations, a penthouse with a private elevator, an armored car with a trusted driver, an office that required 3 levels of clearance to access. The idea that a fugitive janitor could reach her was laughable. Daniel knew this. He couldn't walk into Dorn Industries. Every official channel was a trap. He needed a secret passage, a forgotten door into the fortress. He spent a day huddled in the back of the New York Public Library, using a public terminal. His janitor's knowledge of the company's history was his only guide. He wasn't just a ghost who pushed a mop. He was a ghost who listened. Over the years, he'd absorbed the whispered stories of corporate rises and falls. He was looking for a name, a woman Vera had fired 3 years ago, Eleanor Ramsey. Eleanor had been Vera's executive assistant for over a decade, known for her fierce loyalty and unwavering ethical code. The story Daniel had pieced together was that Vera had asked her to bury a negative internal report ahead of a merger. It wasn't illegal, just dishonest. Eleanor had refused. Vera, who valued loyalty above all else, had fired her on the spot. But the gossip always ended the same way. Vera had respected Eleanor's integrity, even as she punished her for it. Daniel was betting on that integrity. He found her running a small, underfunded women's shelter in the Bronx. It was a desperate gamble, but the only one he had. Eleanor Ramsey's first instinct when she saw the man from the news in her doorway was to scream. It was him, the airport bomber. He looked worse in person, gaunt and haunted, his eyes wide with a fear that was shockingly real. "Please," Daniel said, holding up his hands, his voice a low, desperate rasp. "Don't call the police. I'm not who they say I am. I need your help." "My help?" she repeated, her hand reaching for the phone on her desk. "You're the most wanted man in the country. You need a lawyer, not me." "There's no time," he pleaded, taking a half-step closer. "A man in your old office is going to kill your old boss, and I'm the only one who knows it. He's hunting me, and the police are hunting me. And if either of them finds me before I can get the truth to her, she's going to die." Eleanor paused, her fingers hovering over the phone. The sheer, unadulterated panic in his voice was hard to fake. "Why come to me?" "Because they say you're honest," Daniel said, his words tumbling out. "Because they say you were the only one who ever said no to her. That means she respected you. Maybe, somewhere, she still trusts you. I need you to get a message to her." She studied him, her sharp eyes taking in his worn clothes and the desperate sincerity of his gaze. Her entire life had been about helping people failed by the system. This man looked like the system was actively trying to crush him. "What's the message?" she asked, her voice cautious. Relief flooded Daniel's face. "You have to ask her one question. Just one. Ask her what Malcolm Carver was doing in his office, alone, for 2 hours after midnight the night before her flight to London." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. She knew Malcolm. And the specificity of the question wasn't the rambling of a madman. It was a key. "How do you know that?" she whispered. "Because I was the janitor cleaning the floor," Daniel said. "I heard everything." She made her decision. "Give me the number to your phone. If I can reach her, I will. If this is a trick, I will call the police myself." He scribbled the burner's number on a slip of paper and disappeared back into the city, leaving Eleanor Ramsey standing in the quiet of her shelter, holding a flimsy note that felt like it weighed 100 pounds. That evening, Vera Dorn was in her penthouse, staring at the security logs on her screen when her private, unlisted cell phone rang. It was a number she hadn't seen in 3 years. She answered, her voice wary. "Eleanor?" "Hello, Vera," came the calm, familiar voice from her past. "I'm sorry to call you like this, but I was asked to deliver a message." "A message? From whom?" Vera asked, an uneasy feeling starting to crawl up her spine. "From your janitor," Eleanor said softly. "Daniel Holt." Vera went still. The air in the room seemed to crackle. "What is it?" Eleanor's voice was steady. "He asked me to ask you one question. What was Malcolm Carver doing in his office, alone, for 2 hours after midnight the night before your flight to London?" The words hit Vera like a physical blow. Her breath caught in her chest. It was the exact detail from the security logs. The one anomaly she couldn't explain. The one loose thread. And he knew about it. He knew. In that instant, the entire narrative shattered. The neat, tidy story from the FBI, the image of the crazed employee, it all evaporated, replaced by a single, terrifying truth. Daniel Holt wasn't the monster. He was the Cassandra, the lone voice screaming a warning she had refused to hear. And the real monster was the man she had trusted with her company, with her life. Just then, her private elevator chimed, announcing an arrival. Malcolm. He was on his way up for their dinner meeting, and she was completely, utterly alone with him. The chime of the private elevator was a sound Vera had heard 1,000 times. Tonight, it sounded like a guillotine dropping. Her heart hammered, but years of hostile takeovers had forged her emotions into steel. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She smoothed her blouse, her face becoming a mask of cool neutrality. When the doors slid open, she was smiling, a drink in her hand. "Malcolm," she said, her voice impossibly steady. "You're right on time." He stepped out, his own smile as polished as ever, holding a bottle of her favorite wine. The gesture was thoughtful, calculated. "I thought we could celebrate," he said smoothly, "putting this airport nonsense behind us." "An excellent idea," Vera replied, leading him toward the living area with its panoramic view. Her penthouse, her sanctuary, suddenly felt like a glass box. She poured him a drink, her hands miraculously not shaking. "I spoke with Agent Harris at the FBI today," she began, her tone casual. "They seem utterly convinced the janitor, Holt, acted alone. A classic disgruntled employee case. It's a relief. Now we can finally reschedule the London trip." She watched him over the rim of her glass. She saw it. A subtle relaxing of the muscles around his eyes, a small exhalation of relief. He thought he was safe. "That's excellent news," he said. "It's a tragedy what a disturbed individual can do. Once Holt is dealt with, we'll have no more distractions. Dealt with, not arrested." The words were a confession. While Malcolm admired the view, his back to her, Vera moved toward the marble bar. Her personal phone was there. With movements she prayed looked natural. She picked it up. Her thumb slid across the screen, finding the one contact she knew she could trust. Her personal head of security, Corbin. Her thumb typed a single word, a silent alarm. Nightingale. She hit send and placed the phone back down. Help was coming, but the lobby was 50 floors down. An eternity. "You're quiet tonight, Vera," Malcolm said, turning back to her. "Still shaken from the ordeal?" "Just thinking," she replied. She had to push him, to confirm it beyond all doubt. "It is a funny thing, though." "What's that?" "The security logs," she said, her gaze unwavering. "I was reviewing them after the incident, tightening up protocols. I saw you were here quite late the other night, burning the midnight oil to get the London deal ready, I assume." The question hung in the air between them. Malcolm's smile didn't falter, but it became something fixed and unnatural. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a flat, cold emptiness. He knew. "Always diligent," he said slowly. "You know me, Vera, always taking care of the details." "Some details are harder to take care of than others," she pressed, her heart pounding. He set his glass down on the table, the clink unnervingly loud in the tense silence. He took a step toward her. The mask was gone. The man in front of her was a stranger. "You should have left it alone, Vera," he said, his voice losing its easy charm. "You and that janitor. You should have just gotten on the plane." Vera stepped back, her feigned composure finally starting to crumble. "Why, Malcolm? Why destroy everything we've built?" He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "We built? Don't be naive. I built this. I managed the teams. I cleaned up your messes. You just took the credit. Omnicorp sees my value. They were prepared to pay for it." He advanced on her, cornering her between the bar and the vast expanse of the window. "The plan was simple. A tragic car crash in London. The board appoints me acting CEO. Everyone wins, especially me." His eyes glittered with a fanaticism she had never seen before. It would have worked perfectly, if not for the ghost, the man no one was supposed to see. He was close now, his voice a menacing whisper. "It doesn't matter. It's a loose end I have to clean up myself." He lunged for her. Vera reacted with the brutal efficiency she applied to a corporate raid. As Malcolm lunged, she didn't scream. She moved. She flung the contents of her scotch glass into his eyes. He roared in pain, giving her the split second she needed. She shoved the heavy bar cart into his path with all her strength. It crashed into his shins, and he stumbled, giving her another precious foot of space. "You can't get away, Vera," he snarled, wiping his face, his expression a mask of fury. She scrambled away toward the fireplace, her hand closing around the base of a heavy bronze statue. She hefted it, her arms straining. "Stay back, Malcolm." He just laughed, a chilling, unhinged sound. It's too late. My people are already in motion. Even if you stop me, the janitor is a dead man. A ghost. He started toward her again, slow and deliberate, enjoying the fear in her eyes. The silence in the abandoned warehouse was a living thing, pressing in on Daniel. He stared at the burner phone, willing it to ring. Nothing. Minutes stretched into an hour. Hope curdled into despair. His message hadn't been enough. Vera was probably dead. He was next. He was a fool who thought he could play in a world of kings and assassins. He slid down the grimy wall, the fight finally draining out of him. Just as Malcolm took his final, lunging step toward Vera, a sound ripped through the penthouse, a high-pitched metallic shriek. The reinforced steel doors of the private elevator bowed inward, then burst open. Corbin, Vera's head of security, stood there, flanked by two other men in dark tactical gear. They moved with silent, fluid efficiency. Malcolm's face contorted in disbelief. He had timed this perfectly. The building's security was his. How? Corbin's eyes met Vera's for a fraction of a second. Then his attention snapped to Malcolm. It's over, Carver. Realization dawned on Malcolm's face, followed by pure rage. He wasn't looking at Corbin. He was looking at Vera. You knew. Before he could move, Corbin's team was on him, wrestling him to the ground with practiced force. As they cinched zip ties around his wrists, Malcolm twisted his head, his voice a venomous hiss. "This isn't over," he spat. "You think I'm the only one looking for your janitor? He's a dead man walking. The bounty on his head is more than he'll ever see in his miserable life. He's already dead, Vera." Corbin hauled him to his feet. The threat hung in the air, more chilling than any physical attack. Vera stood, her chest heaving, the statue still clutched in her hand. But her voice, when she spoke to Corbin, was clear and cold as ice. The police could have Malcolm. Her priority was now singular. "Find Daniel Holt," she commanded. "He's not a fugitive. He's a witness, and he is the primary target. Use every resource we have. I want a protective detail on his daughter an hour ago. And I want him found. Find him before they do." "Understood," Corbin said, already speaking into his radio. Daniel was about to throw the burner phone against the wall when it vibrated, the sudden noise making him flinch. An unknown number. He answered. "Hello? Mr. Holt, my name is Corbin. I'm head of security for Vera Dorn." Daniel's heart stopped. She's safe," the voice said, and Daniel almost collapsed with relief. "Malcolm Carver is in custody. You saved her life." Tears pricked at Daniel's eyes. "Thank God." "Mr. Holt, this isn't over," Corbin's voice cut in, sharp and urgent. "Carver's network is still active, and you are their #1 priority. You are no longer a fugitive. You are our primary witness, but you are in extreme danger. I need to know where you are. We are coming to get you." It could be a trap. It was an insane risk. But he had no choice left. "I'm in the old Red Hook textile warehouse," he said. "Don't move," Corbin ordered. "We are 5 minutes out." The line went dead. Daniel stood in the cavernous warehouse, his body trembling. Soon, he heard the low rumble of powerful engines approaching. He peered through a broken window. 2 black SUVs, identical to the one he'd seen in the alley, were pulling up. The doors opened, and figures in dark clothing began to file out. He couldn't see their faces. He could only stand in the suffocating darkness, listening to their footsteps on the gravel, waiting for the warehouse doors to burst open. The warehouse door groaned open, a rectangle of gray pre-dawn light cutting through the darkness. Silhouettes filled the opening, moving with a speed and confidence that was the opposite of thuggish. One figure stepped forward. "Daniel Holt?" the man called out, his voice calm. It was Corbin. The tension in Daniel's chest, a knot that had been tightening for days, finally released in a ragged breath. He was safe. He stepped out of the shadows. "I'm here," he said, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "Let's get you out of here, Mr. Holt," Corbin said. Inside the armored SUV, the door shut with a heavy, satisfying thud. Corbin handed him a bottle of water. "First things first," he said. "A protective detail arrived at your apartment 20 minutes ago. Your daughter is safe. No one can get to her, I promise you that." Daniel squeezed his eyes shut, the words washing over him like a benediction. "Lila is safe." The SUV pulled away smoothly. He was no longer running. They took him to a discreet safe house, and standing in the middle of the living room, waiting for him, was Vera Dorn. She wore simple black trousers and a soft gray sweater. The armor was gone. Her face was pale, etched with the stress of the last 12 hours. For a long moment, they just stood there, the janitor and the CEO. She was the first to speak, her voice quiet, stripped of its usual command. "Daniel, I'm sorry." The words sounded unfamiliar on her tongue, but they were genuine. "I didn't listen. You were telling me the truth, and I was too arrogant to see it. You risked everything to warn me, and I threw you to the floor." Daniel simply nodded, too tired for anger. "You didn't know." "I should have," she insisted. "You saved my life, and I made you a fugitive." "I just did what I thought was right," he said, the words feeling small and inadequate. Corbin stepped forward quietly. "Ma'am, the FBI has been notified that Mr. Holt is in our protective custody. The bomb threat charges will be dropped." He then added, "The team at the apartment has spoken with his daughter's home care nurse to ensure no disruptions to her treatment schedule." Vera's head tilted slightly, her focus sharpening. "Treatment," she repeated, looking from Corbin to Daniel. "What treatment?" Daniel stiffened. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing, Daniel," Vera said, her gaze relentless. "Corbin?" Corbin looked at Daniel with sympathy before answering. "His daughter, Lila, has MLD, metachromatic leukodystrophy. It's a rare degenerative genetic disorder. She requires constant care at home." Vera stared at Daniel, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. She saw it all now, the exhausted eyes, the quiet desperation. This man had been living with a slow-motion tragedy, and yet he had chosen to save her life, a stranger with no expectation of reward. The sheer, selfless integrity of it was staggering. It was humbling. She had measured people by their titles and assets, and this man with nothing had shown her a form of wealth she'd never known. She looked at him, really looked at him, not as a janitor or a fugitive, but as a father, a knight. "My company," she said, her voice soft but firm with a sudden, unshakable resolve, "maintains one of the most advanced genetic research foundations in the world. They are on the verge of a breakthrough in gene therapy for diseases just like Lila's." Daniel looked up, his eyes widening, a flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, hope igniting in their exhausted depths. "Daniel," she said, her voice full of a warmth he'd never thought her capable of, "I'm going to make a call. We're going to get your daughter the best care on the planet, whatever it takes. We're going to fight this. Together." She held up a hand before he could protest. "This is not a reward. This is not a transaction. This is balancing the scales. You did the right thing when it cost you everything. Now it's my turn." 3 months later, the world smelled different. It no longer smelled of antiseptic and fear, but of the rich, loamy earth of the gardens outside the Dorn Medical Institute. The sounds had changed, too. The frantic, terrified beat of his own heart had been replaced by the steady, reassuring rhythm of a machine that now signified hope. Lila was sitting up in bed, her fingers, once too weak to hold a crayon, now deftly piecing together a glittering mosaic. The color had returned to her cheeks. The experimental gene therapy was a long battle, the doctors said, but it was a battle Lila was winning. "Look, Daddy," she said, her voice stronger. She held up her creation, a fiery, smiling dragon. "He's not scary anymore." Daniel smiled, a real, easy smile. "He looks like a great friend, sweet pea." The door swished open and Vera Dorn walked in. Not in a power suit, but in jeans and a sweater, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Daniel, her smile warm and familiar. "I see we have a new masterpiece," she said, leaning over Lila's bed. "He's magnificent, Lila. I think he needs a place of honor in my office." Lila beamed. The easy affection between the billionaire CEO and his daughter was a sight Daniel was still getting used to. The news had long since moved on, but the results were permanent. Malcolm Carver and his co-conspirators were facing decades in prison. Daniel's name had been cleared, and Vera had created a new position for him at the company. He was no longer the invisible janitor. He was her special consultant for internal oversight, a man whose job was to see the things everyone else missed. Later, they sat in the Institute's garden while Lila had a session with her physical therapist. The sun was warm on their faces. "I never properly thanked you," Daniel said quietly, watching his daughter take a few hesitant steps. "A month ago, she couldn't have done that." "You and Lila," Vera replied, her gaze fixed on the little girl. "You gave me back something I didn't even know I'd lost. I had built a fortress, Daniel, and I was dying of loneliness inside it. You taught me that the most valuable assets don't show up on a balance sheet." Lila, having finished her session, came running toward them, her steps unsteady but full of joy. She was holding a piece of paper. It was another drawing. This one wasn't of a knight or a dragon. It was 3 figures, a tall man, a tall woman, and a small girl in the middle, all holding hands under a big, smiling sun. She handed it to Vera. Vera took the drawing, a single tear tracking its way down her cheek. "It's the best deal I've ever made," she whispered. As the sun began to set, the 3 of them walked toward the exit, Lila's small hand held securely between theirs. They were a strange, impossible constellation. The janitor who had become a guardian, the CEO who had become a friend, and the little girl who had saved them both. They were a family forged in fire, built on a foundation of courage and a second chance they had given to each other. And so, their story reminds us that heroes are not defined by the titles they hold, but by the choices they make when no one is watching. It teaches us that integrity is a quiet, powerful force, and that the most profound strength can be found in the most unexpected of places. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And what does being a hero mean to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel and joining us for more tales of hope and courage. And finally, thank you. Truly, thank you for your time and for believing in the power of a good story. Until next time, may you find the courage to be the knight in your own tale.